The sun peeked over the horizon on a crisp autumn morning, painting the small town of Maplewood in shades of gold and orange. The air carried a slight chill, but inside one particular house, warmth radiated from every corner. Today was special, a day that had been marked on calendars for weeks. It was Grandma Rose's 80th birthday, a milestone no one in the family wanted to miss. She wasn't just any grandmother. She was the heart of the Johnson clan. With her quick wit, endless stories, and hugs that could melt away even the worst of days, she held everyone together. For 10-year-old Ethan, this day meant more than just cake and balloons. He loved his grandma with all his heart. She was the one who taught him how to ride a bike without training wheels, cheered him on during school plays, and always had a plate of cookies waiting when he came home. To Ethan, she wasn't just a grandma. She was a superhero. And today he wanted to make sure she felt like one too. Ethan woke up earlier than usual, buzzing with excitement. He couldn't wait to put on the outfit he'd picked out especially for the occasion. A miniature suit jacket hung neatly on the back of his door, paired with a tiny bow tie he'd practiced tying at least a dozen times. Standing in front of the mirror, he adjusted the collar and smoothed down his hair. "You've got to look sharp for Grandma," he muttered to himself, nodding approvingly at his reflection. But it wasn't just about looking good. Ethan had something important planned. He wanted to give a speech. Not just any speech, though. This would be heartfelt, meaningful, and perfect. He'd spent hours rehearsing what he wanted to say, scribbling notes on scraps of paper and reciting them aloud until they sounded just right. As he stood there in his suit, he went over the words again under his breath. "Grandma deserves something special," he said softly, glancing at his reflection. "She does so much for us. I want to tell her how much she means to me." His mom appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a gentle smile. Her eyes sparkled as she watched him fidget with his tie. "You ready for today?" she asked, her voice warm and encouraging. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, I think Grandma's gonna love my speech." His mom chuckled, ruffling his hair playfully. "I'm sure she will. Just don't forget to breathe when you're up there, okay?" He grinned, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling in his chest. Little did anyone know this seemingly ordinary celebration would turn into anything but ordinary. The boy in the suit had no idea that his simple act of love would set off a chain reaction, uncovering secrets buried deep within the family. But for now, all Ethan cared about was making his grandma proud. Downstairs, the house buzzed with activity. Relatives poured in through the front door, carrying dishes covered in foil and trays filled with food. Laughter echoed through the living room as cousins chased each other around furniture, and uncles swapped jokes over cups of coffee. The scent of baked goods wafted through the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves outside. In the center of it all sat the pièce de résistance, a towering chocolate cake adorned with intricate sugar flowers and a single candle shaped like the number 80. It gleamed under the soft glow of string lights, drawing admiring glances from everyone who passed by. Someone joked that it looked too beautiful to eat, while another teased that they'd better get their slice before Uncle Greg showed up. He had a reputation for devouring desserts faster than anyone could blink. As the afternoon wore on, the energy in the room grew louder and livelier. People gathered in clusters, sharing stories and catching up on life. Ethan stayed close to his mom, occasionally sneaking peeks at the cake. His stomach fluttered with anticipation. He knew his moment was coming soon, the moment when all eyes would be on him, and he'd have the chance to tell his grandma exactly how much she meant to him. When the time finally arrived, everyone settled into their seats, turning their attention toward the front of the room. Glasses clinked as people called for speeches, eager to hear what the youngest member of the family had to say. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding like a drum. Clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his hand, he cleared his throat and began. "I just want to say—" His voice trembled slightly, but he pressed on. "That Grandma means everything to me. She's taught me so much about life, love, and being brave." He paused, glancing at the sea of faces watching him, intently. Then, almost hesitantly, he added, "But there's one thing I don't understand." The room fell silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the distant hum of the ceiling fan seemed to fade into the background. All eyes were fixed on the boy, in the suit, waiting to hear what he would say next. What started as an innocent question would soon send shockwaves through the entire family, changing everything they thought they knew about each other and themselves. Ethan's words hung in the air like a thick fog, heavy and unshakable. The room, once alive with chatter and laughter, had fallen eerily silent. Every pair of eyes was glued to the boy standing at the front, his small frame dwarfed by the weight of his question. "Why does Grandma always look sad when she looks at old pictures?" he continued, his voice softer now, but still clear enough for everyone to hear. "And why doesn't she ever talk about Grandpa anymore?" The silence stretched, longer, growing more uncomfortable with each passing second. Some relatives shifted awkwardly in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Others exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to say or do. Ethan didn't understand why his simple question had caused such a stir, but he could feel the tension in the room pressing down on him like a storm cloud ready to burst. His mother hurried over, her face pale and tight. She gently pulled him aside, whispering urgently, "Not now, sweetheart. Let's not bring this up today." Her hands were trembling slightly as she smoothed his bow tie, trying to distract both him and herself from the awkwardness that had settled over the gathering. But it was too late. The seed of curiosity had already been planted, not just in Ethan's mind, but in everyone else's too. Grandma Rose sat quietly at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. Her eyes were fixed on the flickering candle atop the birthday cake, as if she were lost in thought. For a moment, she looked smaller than usual, almost fragile, like the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. Then, without a word, she reached for her glass of water and took a slow sip, her movements deliberate and calm. It was as though she were buying time, waiting for the moment to pass. But the moment didn't pass. At least, not entirely. As the adults tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, Ethan couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. He kept replaying his grandma's reaction in his mind, analyzing every detail. Why had she gone so quiet? Why did his mom seem so anxious? And why had no one answered his question? The unease lingered even as dessert time approached. The grand finale of the celebration, the towering chocolate cake, was brought to the center of the table amidst applause and cheers. Someone joked about how they hoped there would be enough slices to go around, while another relative teased Uncle Greg about his infamous sweet tooth. Laughter bubbled up again, momentarily masking the earlier tension. Uncle Greg, true to form, stepped forward eagerly to cut the first slice. He grabbed the knife with a grin, clearly enjoying the spotlight. But just as he leaned over the cake, disaster struck. In his enthusiasm, he accidentally knocked the entire thing off the table. With a loud thud, the cake hit the floor, sending frosting and crumbs flying everywhere. For a split second, there was stunned silence. Then came the inevitable eruption of gasps, groans, and nervous laughter. Chaos ensued as people scrambled to clean up the mess, grabbing napkins and plates to salvage what little they could. Kids giggled uncontrollably, finding humor in the unexpected turn of events, while adults sighed and shook their heads. Amidst the commotion, Ethan noticed something peculiar. While everyone else was distracted by the ruined cake, Grandma Rose slipped away unnoticed. She moved slowly, almost hesitantly, heading toward the hallway that led to her bedroom. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of sadness and exhaustion that made Ethan's heart ache. He wanted to follow her, to ask if she was okay, but he hesitated. Something told him this wasn't the right time. Instead, he stood frozen, watching as she disappeared behind the closed door. The image of her retreating figure stayed with him long after the noise in the dining room faded into background chatter. Later that evening, as the guests began to leave and the house grew quieter, Ethan found himself unable to let go of the questions swirling in his mind. Why had his grandma looked so upset? What was it about those old pictures that made her sad? And most importantly, why wouldn't anyone give him a straight answer? Unable to resist his curiosity, Ethan decided to take matters into his own hands. After everyone had gone to bed, he crept upstairs to the attic, where Grandma Rose kept boxes of old photographs and letters. The attic was dimly lit, with dusty beams crisscrossing the ceiling and stacks of forgotten belongings lining the walls. It smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs, a scent that reminded him of lazy summer afternoons spent exploring hidden treasures. Using a flashlight, Ethan carefully sifted through the boxes, his fingers brushing against brittle paper and faded fabric. His heart raced with anticipation as he opened one box after another, hoping to find something, anything, that might help him understand. Finally, tucked beneath a pile of yellowed envelopes, he discovered an old photograph. It was worn around. The edges, its colors faded with age, but the faces in the picture were unmistakable. In the photo, a much younger Grandma Rose stood beside a man who looked strikingly familiar yet somehow different. They were smiling, their arms wrapped around each other, frozen in a moment of pure happiness. On the back of the photo, written in neat cursive, were the words, "Rose and James, 1965. Ethan frowned, studying the man's face closely. He recognized the name. It belonged to his grandfather, the man everyone said had passed away years before Ethan was born. But something about the picture didn't add up. The man standing next to Grandma Rose didn't match the descriptions he'd heard about his grandfather. He was taller, with darker hair and a kinder smile. Who was this man, really? And why did he look so different from the stories? Confused and determined to get answers, Ethan tucked the photograph into his pocket and headed downstairs. Tomorrow, he vowed silently, he would confront his grandma. He would ask her the truth no matter how hard it might be to hear. Because deep down, he knew that sometimes, the hardest questions lead to the most beautiful answers, and he was willing to face whatever came next to uncover the truth. The next morning, Ethan woke up with the photograph still tucked safely in his pocket. He hadn't slept much the night before, his mind racing with questions about the man in the picture and what it all meant. The attic had been dark and quiet, but now, as sunlight streamed through the cracks in his curtains, the weight of his discovery felt heavier than ever. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself any longer. After getting dressed, Ethan tiptoed downstairs, careful not to wake anyone else. The house was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. He found Grandma Rose sitting alone in the living room, sipping tea by the window. Her face softened slightly when she saw him approach, though there was still a lingering sadness in her eyes that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Morning, kiddo," she said softly, patting the seat beside her on the couch. "You're up early," Ethan hesitated for a moment, clutching the photograph tightly in his hand. His heart pounded as he tried to gather his thoughts. How could he ask her something so personal without making her upset? But then he remembered how much he loved her and how much he wanted to understand her better. Taking a deep breath, he sat down next to her and pulled the photo from his pocket. "Grandma," he began, holding it out toward her. "Who is this man?" For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Grandma Rose froze, her teacup halfway to her lips. When she finally lowered it back onto the saucer, her hands were trembling ever so slightly. She stared at the photograph, her expression unreadable, before letting out a long, shaky sigh. "Oh, Ethan," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached for the photo, tracing its edges with trembling fingers. For a while, she didn't say anything, lost in thought as memories flooded back like waves crashing against the shore. Ethan watched her closely, unsure whether he should speak or wait patiently for her to gather her words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she began to talk. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying the weight of years gone by. "This man," she said, pointing to the figure beside her younger self, "is James. He was someone very special to me." Ethan tilted his head, listening intently. "Was he your husband?" he asked innocently. Grandma shook her head slowly, her gaze distant. "No, sweetheart, he wasn't." She paused, taking another sip of tea as if bracing herself for what she was about to say next. "James was someone I loved deeply, a long time ago. Back then things were different. People cared a lot more about what others thought, about rules and expectations." She glanced at Ethan, her eyes filled with both pain and nostalgia. "I met James when I was young, about your age actually. We fell in love quickly, and for a while, everything felt perfect. But life isn't always fair, especially when you're told who you can and cannot be with." Ethan frowned, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "What do you mean?" Grandma sighed again, leaning back into the couch. "My family, they didn't approve of James. They thought he wasn't good enough for me, that we came from two different worlds. And back then their opinion mattered more than my own happiness. So even though my heart belonged to him, I did what I was told. I married someone else." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Ethan's eyes widened as he pieced together the story. "But what happened to James?" he asked cautiously, afraid of the answer. A tear slipped down Grandma Rose's cheek, catching the morning light. She wiped it away quickly, forcing a small smile. "He passed away, Ethan, a long time ago. It broke my heart, losing him the way I did, not just because of death, but because of the choices I made, because of the life I lived without him." There was a long silence between them as Ethan absorbed her confession. He had never imagined his grandma carrying such a deep sorrow inside her, hidden behind her warm smiles and comforting hugs. In that moment, she didn't seem like the strong, unshakable woman he'd always known. She seemed fragile, vulnerable, and achingly human. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Ethan asked quietly, his voice tinged with sadness. "Did you think we wouldn't understand?" Grandma looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It wasn't easy, Ethan. Talking about James, it felt like opening old wounds, and maybe part of me was ashamed too. Ashamed of the life I chose, of the dreams I gave up. But mostly I didn't want anyone to pity me. I wanted to protect you all from the pain I carried." Ethan reached over and took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "We wouldn't have pitied you, Grandma. We love you. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Her lips quivered as she smiled, pulling him into a tight hug. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much that means to me." They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, the weight of decades melting away bit by bit. When they finally pulled apart, Grandma Rose dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, laughing softly. "Look at us turning this beautiful morning into a tear fest. Let's get some breakfast, shall we?" Ethan nodded, feeling lighter somehow. As they headed toward the kitchen together, he realized something important. Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones holding on to secrets we'd never expect. But those secrets, no matter how painful, only remind us of one thing: that everyone has a story worth listening to. Later that day, as the rest of the family gathered around the table for brunch, Ethan noticed a change in the atmosphere. There was a newfound warmth, a sense of understanding that hadn't been there before. Grandma Rose seemed different too, calmer, freer, as if a burden had been lifted off her shoulders. Though the cake may have been destroyed and the birthday celebration turned upside down, something beautiful had emerged from the chaos. Honesty, forgiveness, and a deeper bond that would hold the family together for years to come. The rest of the day unfolded in a way no one could have predicted. After Ethan's heartfelt conversation with Grandma Rose, the air in the house felt lighter, as though an invisible weight had been lifted. But it wasn't just about the two of them anymore. What started as a private moment between a boy and his grandmother soon rippled outward, touching every corner of the family. As everyone gathered around the kitchen table for brunch, Grandma Rose surprised everyone by speaking. "Up!" She cleared her throat softly, drawing the attention of the room. Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I need to say something," she began, her words cutting through the casual chatter like a knife. The clinking of forks against plates stopped and all eyes turned toward her. For a moment she hesitated, glancing at Ethan sitting beside her. He gave her an encouraging nod, his small hand still resting on hers. Taking a deep breath, she continued. Yesterday, Ethan asked me a question, a very important question, one I've avoided answering for years. The room grew quiet, the kind of silence where you could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. No one spoke, no one moved. Even Uncle Greg, who usually filled awkward pauses with jokes, stayed silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. Grandma rose, took another sip of her tea, gathering her thoughts. He asked me why I look sad when I see old pictures, and why I don't talk about my past much. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. The truth is, I've been carrying something inside me for a very long time, something I thought I'd buried forever. Her confession sent a ripple of unease through the room. Ethan watched as his mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while Aunt Linda dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Uncle Greg leaned forward, his usual grin replaced by a look of genuine concern. I loved someone once, Grandma Rose continued, her voice trembling slightly. His name was James. We were young, full of dreams and completely in love. But life didn't work out the way we hoped. My family disapproved of him. They said he wasn't good enough for me. Back then, people cared a lot about what others thought, about rules and appearances. She paused again, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. So, I did what I was told. I let go of James and married someone else. It broke my heart, but I convinced myself it was for the best. Over the years, I tried to forget him, to move on. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase the memories or the pain. A tear slid down her cheek, catching the sunlight streaming through the window. This time she didn't bother wiping it away. Instead, she looked directly at Ethan, her expression softening. When your mom brought you into this world, I promised myself I wouldn't let regrets define me. I wanted to be strong for you, for all of you. But sometimes, even the strongest hearts carry scars. Her words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. No one dared interrupt her. It was as if they were collectively holding their breath, waiting for her to finish. Finally, she added, I never meant to hurt anyone. I just kept my pain hidden because I thought it would protect you, protect our family. But maybe hiding isn't the answer. Maybe it's time to let go. The room remained silent for a beat longer, the weight of her confession settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. Then, slowly, Aunt Linda stood up and walked over to Grandma Rose, pulling her into a tight hug. We love you, she whispered, her own voice choked with emotion. Always have, always will. One by one, the rest of the family followed suit. Ethan's mom wrapped her arms around both her son and her mother, tears streaming down her face. Uncle Greg, usually the joker of the group, simply patted Grandma Rose on the shoulder, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. Even the kids, who hadn't fully grasped the depth of the story, sensed the significance of the moment and hugged her too. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat as he watched his family come together. For so long, he'd seen Grandma Rose as invincible, the glue that held everyone together. But now he realized she was human, just like the rest of them. She had made mistakes, carried burdens, and faced heartbreak. And yet, despite it all, she had continued to pour her love into the people around her. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, the family decided to take a walk together. They strolled through the neighborhood, laughing and reminiscing about old times. Someone mentioned a funny story about a Thanksgiving dinner gone wrong, while another shared a memory of a road trip that ended in disaster. Laughter bubbled up, naturally easing the tension that had lingered earlier in the day. At one point, Ethan found himself walking alongside his grandma. Are you okay? He asked quietly, glancing up at her. She smiled down at him, her eyes twinkling. Better than I've been in a long time, kiddo. Thank you for asking the hard questions, and for reminding me that it's okay to let people in. Ethan grinned, feeling a surge of pride. You're the strongest person I know, he said earnestly. Grandma chuckled, ruffling his hair. Oh, sweetheart, I'm not strong because I've kept secrets all these years. I'm strong because I finally let them go. That evening, as the family sat together under the stars, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows over a small fire pit, Ethan noticed something different about everyone. There was a newfound closeness, a sense of understanding and acceptance that hadn't been there before. Secrets had a way of building walls, but honesty had a way of tearing them down. As he gazed around at the faces illuminated by the flickering flames, Ethan realized something important. Families weren't perfect. They argued, they laughed, they cried, and sometimes they stumbled upon truths that changed everything. But through it all, they stuck together, not because they were flawless, but because they loved each other deeply. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Ethan felt grateful, not just for the answers he'd uncovered, but for the journey that had brought them closer than ever before. The days following Grandma Rose's confession brought a subtle but profound shift in the family. Conversations that had once revolved around surface-level topics, like weekend plans or updates on work and school, now delved deeper. People began opening up about their own struggles, fears, and regrets. It was as if Grandma Rose's honesty had given everyone permission to be vulnerable, to let go of the masks they'd worn for so long. Ethan noticed this change most during dinner. On any other night, the table would buzz with light-hearted banter and playful teasing. But now there was an undercurrent of sincerity. His mom talked about how hard it had been raising him and his siblings while juggling her career. Uncle Greg admitted he often felt like he wasn't doing enough despite his constant jokes and cheerful demeanor. Even Aunt Linda, who always seemed to have everything together, shared how she sometimes doubted herself as a parent. For Ethan, hearing these stories made him realize something important. No one was perfect, not even the adults he looked up to. Everyone carried their own burdens, just like Grandma Rose. And yet somehow knowing this didn't make them seem weaker. If anything, it made them stronger, because instead of hiding their pain, they were choosing to face it together. One evening after dinner, Ethan found himself sitting beside Grandma Rose on the porch swing. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the world wind down for the day. You know, Grandma Rose said suddenly, breaking the quiet, I used to think I was protecting you all by keeping my secrets. That if I didn't talk about James, I could spare you from feeling sad. Ethan turned to look at her, his brow furrowing slightly. But it wasn't really protecting us, was it? She smiled softly, her eyes glistening in the fading light. No, sweetheart. You're right. Secrets might keep things calm on the surface, but they also build walls. Walls that can make people feel alone, even when they're surrounded by love. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. He understood what she meant now. Before he'd seen her sadness without truly understanding why. But after learning about James, he realized she hadn't just been missing someone from her past. She'd been carrying guilt, regret, and loneliness for decades. No wonder she'd look so distant whenever she flipped through old photo albums. Do you think Grandpa knew? Ethan asked hesitantly. He wasn't sure if he should bring it up, but curiosity got the better of him. Grandma Rose sighed deeply, leaning back against the swing. Your grandpa, he wasn't blind. He knew there was something between James and me before we parted ways. But he never held it against me. In fact, he tried his best to fill the void James left behind. He loved me deeply, and I loved him too, in my own way. Her voice softened as she added, but love isn't always black and white, Ethan. Sometimes it's messy and complicated. What matters is that you try your best to honor the people you care about, and yourself. Ethan mulled over her words, letting them sink in. For the first time, he saw his grandma not just as a hero or a source of comfort, but as a person who had made choices, faced consequences, and lived with the weight of those decisions every single day. It made him admire her even more. The next morning, the family gathered in the living room to sort through old boxes of photographs and mementos. Grandma Rose suggested it, saying it was time to revisit the memories she'd kept tucked away for so long. Ethan joined in eagerly, eager to learn more about the woman who had shaped his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. As they sifted through yellowed letters and faded Polaroids, stories spilled out effortlessly. One picture showed Grandma Rose standing beside James at a park, both of them laughing as they held hands. Another captured her dancing with Grandpa at their wedding, her smile radiant despite the shadows lurking beneath the surface. Each item told a piece of her story, a tapestry woven with joy, heartbreak, resilience, and love. At one point, Ethan pulled out a small, intricately decorated box. Inside, he found a locket containing two tiny pictures, one of James, the other of Grandpa. His eyes widened as he held it up. "What's this?" he asked, showing it to Grandma Rose. She smiled wistfully, taking the locket from him. "This was my reminder that love comes in many forms. James gave me my first taste of romance, the kind that makes your heart race and your world feel endless. Your grandpa gave me stability, partnership, and a family to call my own. Both were gifts, in their own way." Her explanation struck a chord with Ethan. Love wasn't about picking one person over another. It was about cherishing the moments, lessons, and connections that shaped you along the way. For Grandma Rose, it wasn't about erasing James from her memory or forgetting the life she'd built with Grandpa. It was about embracing both, honoring them, and finding peace within herself. By the end of the day, the house felt different, not physically, but emotionally. The attic, once filled with dusty relics of the past, now seemed alive with meaning. Every photograph, every letter, carried a story that connected the family to its roots. And for the first time, Ethan felt like he truly belonged, not just as a member of the family, but as part of something much bigger. That night, as everyone gathered around the fireplace for one last cozy evening together, Ethan couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. What started as a simple birthday celebration had turned into a journey of discovery, not just for him, but for everyone. Secrets had come to light, tears had been shed, and hearts had healed, little by little. Grandma Rose caught his eye from across the room and gave him a warm smile. She didn't need to say anything, her gratitude was written all over her face. Ethan grinned back, feeling a swell of pride. He may have been the one to ask the tough questions, but it was the entire family who had answered them, with courage, love, and unity. As the fire crackled softly and laughter echoed through the room, Ethan realized that families weren't defined by perfection. They were defined by the willingness to stand by each other, flaws and all. And in that moment, surrounded by the people he loved most, he felt grateful, not just for the answers he'd uncovered, but for the bond that had grown stronger because of them. The final day of the family gathering dawned bright and crisp, with sunlight streaming through the windows and casting golden patterns on the wooden floors. It was time for everyone to pack up and head home, but no one seemed in a rush to leave. There was a lingering warmth in the air, a sense that this visit had been different from all the others, deeper, more meaningful. Conversations flowed easily now, filled with laughter and shared memories, but also moments of quiet reflection. Ethan spent most of the morning helping Grandma Rose tidy up the house. Together, they folded blankets, wiped down tables, and put away leftover dishes. It was simple work, but it gave them plenty of time to talk. As they moved around the kitchen, Ethan couldn't help but notice how much lighter she seemed. Her steps were steadier, her smile brighter, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally lifted. "You know?" Ethan said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I think I understand something now." Grandma Rose paused, turning to look at him with a curious expression. "What's that, kiddo?" He hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "I used to think being strong meant never showing weakness, like you always had to have everything figured out. But now, I think being strong is about letting people see your scars, letting them help you carry the load." Her eyes softened and she reached out to squeeze his hand. "You're wiser than your years, sweetheart. That's exactly what I've learned too." Life isn't about pretending everything's okay. It's about finding the courage to say when it's not. They shared a quiet smile, the kind that didn't need any more words. For Ethan, it felt like a promise, a silent agreement that they would always be there for each other, no matter what life threw their way. Later that afternoon, the family gathered outside for one last group photo before saying goodbye. The backyard was bathed in soft autumn light, with leaves swirling gently in the breeze. Someone set up a tripod and timer so everyone could squeeze into the frame together. Kids perched on laps, adults wrapped arms around shoulders, and even the dog managed to make an appearance, wagging its tail enthusiastically. As the camera clicked, capturing the messy, imperfect beauty of the moment, Ethan glanced around at the faces surrounding him. His mom stood beside Aunt Linda, both of them laughing as they tried to corral the younger cousins into position. Uncle Greg cracked a joke that sent everyone into fits of giggles, while Grandma Rose sat front and center, her hands resting gently in her lap. She looked peaceful, content, a far cry from the woman who had once hidden her pain behind polite smiles and cheerful chatter. When the photos were done, the goodbyes began. Hugs were exchanged, promises made to stay in touch, and bags loaded into cars. Ethan lingered near the driveway, watching as relatives drove off one by one. Each departure felt bittersweet, but there was also a sense of hope, a belief that the connections forged over the past few days would endure long after the weekend ended. Finally, only Ethan and Grandma Rose remained. They stood side by side, on the porch, watching the dust settle on the empty road. The quiet stretched between them, comfortable and familiar. "Well," Grandma Rose said eventually, breaking the silence. "That was quite the birthday celebration, wasn't it?" Ethan chuckled, nudging her playfully with his elbow. "Yeah, definitely not what I expected, but I think it turned out pretty great." She nodded, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. Sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places. A ruined cake, a curious boy, and a whole lot of honesty. That's what brought us closer than ever. Her words struck a chord with Ethan. He realized that none of this, the conversations, the tears, the healing, would have happened if he hadn't asked the hard questions, if he hadn't dared to dig deeper, to seek the truth behind the smiles. And yet it wasn't just his curiosity that had sparked change. It was the willingness of the entire family to listen, to open their hearts, and to embrace vulnerability. "Hey, Grandma," Ethan asked after a while, his voice soft but earnest. I'm really glad I got to know you better. Not just the grandma part, the whole you." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she smiled through it, pulling him into a tight hug. "And I'm glad you did too, sweetheart. You've reminded me that it's never too late to start fresh, to heal." They stayed like that for a moment, holding on to each other as the sun dipped lower in the sky. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew life wouldn't always be easy. Not for him, and certainly not for Grandma Rose. There would still be challenges, misunderstandings, and tough days ahead. But he also knew that love, honesty, and forgiveness could bridge even the widest gaps. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he thought about everything that had unfolded over the past few days. From the initial excitement of dressing up for Grandma's birthday to the chaos of the fallen cake, and finally to the raw honesty of her confession, it had been a whirlwind of emotions. Yet, through it all, one thing remained clear. Families weren't perfect. They stumbled, argued, and sometimes hurt each other unintentionally. But they also forgave, supported, and grew stronger because of it. Before drifting off to sleep, Ethan whispered a silent thank you to Grandma Rose for trusting him enough to share her story, to his family for coming together during a difficult moment, and to himself for having the courage to ask the questions that mattered. Because in the end, it wasn't the secrets or the struggles that defined them. It was the love they chose to give, day after day, that made them a family. And as the house settled into the quiet hum of nighttime, Ethan fell asleep with a smile on his face, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it together.